Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Dogman Sasquatch Oklahoma Encounters. My name is Lance Hightower, one of the CRYPTID brothers. Along with my brother Bill, will be your host this evening. Before we get going with part 2 of the review my brother Bill did with the Dr. Melba Ketchum's DNA Sasquatch Genome Project, let's recognize some of you out there, the subbers, for without you we would not have a show. And we appreciate you sharing our show with your friends, family, and co-workers, not only here within the U.S., but all over the world. So again, this is our small way of thanking you by recognizing you on the air. We have Norman Lynn, Chrisma Ma, Claudio Majora, Chris S., Jerry Henderson, Scott Taylor, Steve Gum, Thriftster, Roya 5134, Paul Burrell, Stephen Moore, Sonny Dow, Jason Hiroshiark, Thomas Kemp, Alex Peck, and Shane Album. Thank you guys so very much. We appreciate you. So let's go to part 2 of last week's episode of Bill and I discussing Bill's in-depth review that he had of Dr. Melba Ketchum's DNA Sasquatch Project review, and putting it in layman terms just how in-depth her work really was.
There was, like I said, there was tissue that was analyzed in blood and saliva, but specific to degradation, when the electron microscope, which actually sees the unknown species DNA, down to the actual DNA strands, when that was analyzed in the high-quality DNA, according to the study, there was actually several gaps of missing strands of DNA were noted in the purported samples of Bigfoot. And unlike the typical double-stranded DNA,
right,
there were regions of unexpected single strands of DNA interspersed with the expected double strands of DNA. And the study claims that this was not due to any chemical modification or degradation of the DNA, but says that sample 26, for example, it tested male gender, and for which the electron microscope was used, did actually have degradation. So, they said, okay, yeah, well, this one does have degradation, although very little according to the study. So I don't know what very little is, that they just said, well, it had very little degradation. Would this certain amount of degradation affect how it appeared under the electron microscope? Well, I don't know the answer, but to this point, even though I speak here of a lingering question, she actually did intentionally degrade DNA, some of the non-Bigfoot samples, so the human controls, to remove any possibility of operator or chemical error during the process of analysis. So interestingly, she degraded the human control DNA, and it did not exhibit the very odd DNA structure exhibited by the samples when examined under the electron microscope. So you can't say this weird-looking DNA with its single DNA. Exactly.
You can't say it's just human, because she tried to destroy it. In other words, degradation is basically the process of breaking it down, intentionally trying to break the DNA strands apart,
right,
from the bonds that they have at an electron level, and try to make it look like this double single-stranded samples.
They couldn't reproduce it through intentional degradation.
Oh.
So they're like, okay, well, we can't say degradation was the cause then of our results. So
she did her homework.
She did.
She really did her homework on this.
Exactly. And so, specific to the testing of the sex or gender determining region of DNA, instead of the DNA yielding either female, which is a XX chromosome, or male, XY chromosome, the study showed consistently 4 results. This is where it gets, these genetics somehow is difficult to understand a little bit, but the results, you'd think, okay, it's either going to show male or female, right? But it showed female, male, and then Y chromosome alone and nothing. And so...
Say that one more time.
So these samples, right? The hair samples, tissue samples, etc.
Okay.
You think, because they're looking at the gender of these samples also.
Correct.
And you think, okay, well, it's either going to show a female, which is XX chromosome, or male, XY chromosome.
That human. That's
right.
That's the human. XX, XY, okay.
Right. And it showed that, but also Y alone and then nothing. So they argued that this wasn't due to any degradation of the DNA, nor to any low amount of DNA or missing DNA or artifact, but rather made the claim that since human DNA doesn't typically act this way, that a novel species was the explanation. They further explained that although the high-quality DNA was present in these findings, they did say that this should not have occurred, specific to the missing sex gender region of DNA. So they're kind of confused on why it's acting this way, why they're getting DNA that shows not only male, not only female, but other results like just Y alone or nothing. And so it's not acting like they would expect it to. Interesting.
Very.
When the sequencing of the sections of unknown DNA that code for proteins, the exons, or important parts of DNA, if you will, many samples failed to even amplify or yield any results, which made me wonder a little bit about degradation, not contamination. Could this be related to the missing strands of DNA seen by the electron microscope? Although the study simply refers to these missing strands as unusual and theorizes that this double-stranded, single-stranded DNA appearance is not from handling error or artifact, but rather serves possibly an unknown purpose for DNA replication. So they're theorizing, okay, well maybe it's that. They just don't know. They're having some result they didn't expect. Maybe the Bigfoot DNA is so genetically different it doesn't follow the normal rules and results geneticists would expect. But moving on here, we talked about the contamination issue. To me, that's laid to rest. I mean, she took exhaustive steps to prevent that. And they did in the study, which I thought was one of those things where maybe they could have went further. There was a reddish brown juvenile Sasquatch named Matilda, and actually there's pictures online. You can look at it, and it shows her sleeping. And looking at videos Dr. Melba Ketchum has had on YouTube, and she does say that that was a real Squatch. It was sample 37, and it was filmed, like I said, and actually in the study they note the respiratory rate, and it was 6 breaths per minute, and but reportedly it's under the watchful eye of scientists, but it only contributed one sample 37. So I mean, that was kind of a bummer. I think if they had got this Squatch under their watchful eye, study the heck out of it.
Oh yeah, why not?
Exactly. And so I'm like, well,
so where is Matilda at right now? Do you know? Did they say?
I'm guessing. I think Kentucky, in the woods of Kentucky.
Oh, she's in the woods of Kentucky. Okay.
Yeah. And so they're on page 4 of her study, figure 2. There's a linear trackway, and it's a picture of Bigfoot tracks in the sand. There's no mention of any background on that. I'd like to kind of know what the scoop was on that. But as we know, talking about the linear track of Bigfoot, it's one in front of the other, right?
Exactly.
It's a linear pattern.
It's a linear path.
And that's a whole discussion in itself as far as signs of Bigfoot, but they didn't go into that. GenBank, it's widely adopted and recognized genetic suppository. They actually refused to accept the DNA sequences generated from the Bigfoot study.
This is a place that stores the DNA information of everything of known.
Right.
Whatever we find, this is like the bank. This is like your bank that keeps your money. This is the bank that keeps the DNA information.
Exactly. Right.
And they refused?
They refused, and they refused to accept the sequences. So, you tell them, hey, this study had these sequences. It's an unknown species. And GenBank's like, yep, sounds good. We identify that as a new species. But they refused to accept Dr. Ketchum's sequences.
So that begs the question, who owns GenBank?
Good question.
Right. You know what I mean?
Right.
Is it university sponsored? Is it medically sponsored? Is it federal government sponsored? Is it private? I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
I mean, that, because whoever...
That's interesting. I don't know.
Maybe I need to find out.
Yeah, that's true. And so, like I said, they refused to accept the sequences. And, was that due to the study not classifying the samples into a type of species or category? Was the denial on GenBank's part a bias or some failure scientifically to properly classify their findings, if such could be done? It's interesting. We'll go further here. Let's talk about let's go back to the hairs.
Okay.
And there was a physician, actually, Dr. Toller. He performed the histopathological examination of the Bigfoot hair, purported Bigfoot hair, and tissue sample. He found some things very interesting, actually, that these samples were not typical of human hair. And again, this is all in our paper. For example, there's areas of extra hair follicles were found, and the location of such was deeper in the dermal region than that of human follicles. So more hair follicles were found and deeper in the dermis than what we would typically find in humans. So there was areas of lesser numbers of sweat glands and sebaceous glands, which are the glands responsible for the oily wax skin lubricant called sebum.
So you said less?
Less, which, again, that doesn't mean that this organism has less. It was just these particular hairs that they got.
Where they received the sample.
Right. So the hair could have been from maybe the chest and not the armpit or
the anterior part of the thigh.
Right. So it doesn't for sure give you a full representation of that necessarily, but these particular samples showed, but there wasn't any explanation to give that the study gave to possibly explain these very interesting findings. So like I said earlier, these forensic hair experts, they compared them across the known collection of animals. So that included human, cat, dog, cow, horse, bear, deer, elk, fox, moose, wolf, coyote, monkey, beaver, llama, rat, and other known animals. So,
wow. So they had.
So they knew what all these hairs look like. They,
sure.
Apparently some guy knows what how to tell a llama hair from a fox hair, and so there's differences.
Well, the morphology, the characteristics of the hair. I was watching a program on television one time, and it is very, very analytical of this data bank. They actually have the samples of every known animal species, and it's not only a made in a plate glass for a microscope, like an oil immersion,
right?
But they have large samples of this in sterile bags and drawers, and where it's collected. Yeah, right. So you have, I'll just use this for just an example. They'll have a German Shepherd, hair here in the United States, and then they'll have a German Shepherd in Australia and the UK. So they have, of the known species or breed, they'll have multiple samples from all over the world of that dog. It's just amazing.
Wow.
It's incredible, this suppository of this hair. So I can only imagine, what you're...
Well, and so they when they analyzed this hair, they went in depth, certainly, and what they did is the human hair on average has a width of 30 to 100 microns in diameter. Okay, and the purported Bigfoot hair measured consistently 80 microns to 110 microns in diameter. So it's a bigger hair.
Yeah.
And still tested having human mitochondrial DNA.
Okay, so right there, I'm going to ask you a question because I know what people are thinking right now. Okay, and I'm serious because people are saying, wait a minute. I know this gets into more of a religious, philosophical, but when people hear that this scientific study and that, we obviously know our mitochondrial and nuclear DNA of who we are as humans, a lot of people think this is going to shake their faith. This is going to, we don't want to acknowledge this because if we acknowledge that these things, don't tell me this thing has human DNA in it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But to me, and I've had this discussion with Wiley Dave and Lane, but to me, it supports my faith because as a believer,
right,
and many of, there's people out there that's going to listen to this that may not be believers, and that's fine, to each their own, but I'm going to tell you, our premise, and this is, we've not got into this discussion, you and I, but my premise, I should say, is that, and Dave, I've talked to him about this, is that if you are a believer in the Lord, then you believe the Bible. And if you believe the Bible, it's just not a bunch of old stories. These things really existed. It's not biblical fiction, it's historical. And this gets into other discussions, of course, not for right now, but people, I know this is going to rub people the wrong way when they hear this.
Well, yeah, and I hear what you're saying, and and like I said at the start of kind of the intro, is like I'll look at the study and see what the study tells me about this study. Now, people can draw their own conclusions beyond what the study says as far as religion or not, their belief in Bigfoot or not. But again, this is what the study says, according to Dr. Ketchum, as far as what the results are, and I'll just leave it to people to make their own decisions and conclusions.
I'm with you. I understand. I'm with you. I know what some of the listening audience people are thinking, these things can't have any human DNA. They're totally,
right.
This, and people get into these things cloaking out of a fifth dimension, and our premise is that no, they're flesh and blood.
Right.
They don't come in and out of a portal that connects us to another universe. They just have adapted so well over thousands and thousands and thousands of years that they blend into their environment. They're masters of their environment. We see that many times before. We're not the only ones that say that.
Right.
And that they know how to use their environment to their advantage. And so where you can't see them. So I just bring that up. I'm not trying to throw a kink in it here. I'm just saying that...
No, I hear you.
People say they hear this, it's got human mitochondrial DNA, and they freak out. And it shouldn't shake them up.
No.
It should support what they know, not what they believe, what they know. And it more or less defines, in my opinion, that the Bible is factual when they talk about giants, and when they talk about Nephilim, and they talk about fallen angels. And again, that's a whole nother conversation we don't have time to get into. But I'm just saying, to me, it supports it.
Right.
And so that's all I just wanted to mention. I didn't.
No, I hear what you're saying. I'm in agreement, certainly. But the suspected Bigfoot hair, going back into describing the hair, on average, the study, 6 inches long compared to humans. The scale patterns, and you had touched upon this earlier, the scale pattern on the surface of hairs was different from that of humans. Again, so this this hair wasn't animal in origin because of the human mitochondrial DNA found within it. And interestingly, the DNA sample study found that the origins of which, in her study here, were related to people from European or Middle Eastern descent, although African and American Indian origins was also involved to a lesser extent, according to the study. So it points to the possibility of Europeans migrating across the frozen northern Atlantic Ocean to North America during the Ice Age around 20,000 years ago, predating the more commonly accepted migration of people from Asia 13,000 years ago across the Bering Land Bridge. And this, of course, isn't proven, but it's called the Solutrean theory. And so she mentions this in her study. So I looked further into this and found a really interesting article regarding genetic testing published in the widely respected National Geographic November 22nd, 2013 issue. And so talking about migrations here and genetics and such, in Russia near Lake Baikal, and actually that's the world's largest or deepest lake at 5,453 feet.
Wow.
It's 1,300 miles of coastline, and archaeologists discovered the remains of a Siberian youth's arm bone dated to be about 24,000 years old, which the article states may be the oldest genome or genetic testing of modern humans ever sequenced. So 2 things within the article, according to the scientist, were of interest. That humans occupied the Siberian region during the brutally cold last glacial maximum, which ended 13,000 years ago. But more interestingly, that the youth's arm bone genes were genetically dissimilar to that of modern East Asians, but more similar to Europeans, Middle Easterns, and Native Americans. So prevailing theory suggests that Native Americans are descended from East Asians who crossed the land bridge over 13,000 years ago. However, the study in the article changes this idea, showing that nearly a third of the genome or genes of Native Americans' ancestry derives not from East Asia, but rather are related to people in present-day Europe and Middle Eastern countries. So if Europeans migrated 20,000 years ago across a frozen northern Atlantic Ocean ice cap, as the Solutrean theory proposes, this would coincide with the findings noted by Dr. Ketchum's study.
Interesting, because I have heard that before where, and I don't know if they were going, I don't know if they did that in depth to look at the genetics of it, but they were looking more at the morphology of the facial features as a possible. So this is interesting. You're saying, so they're basically saying that these cryptids are more of from possibly a Middle Eastern, or excuse me, European, Middle Eastern type of combination.
Potentially, and it's not to say that there was no migration across the Bering Land Bridge. I mean, that's well established, and certainly East Asians did migrate across that, but the genes in these samples suggested that they were more descended, like I said, a third of the genes were from, the Europeans and Middle Easterns folks. So, interesting. Doesn't mean that's for certain. It's,
Well, at least it lends itself more credible to that, or a propensity for that, I should
right
say.
For her study to coincide and agree a little bit with this National Geographic article, there's some
similarities there.
Some similarities, exactly. So the Bigfoot hair DNA, when compared to the many millions of DNA sequences, like I said, over 300,000 known organisms, it was that are found in GenBank using a blast search, consistently showed homology with human haplotypes per the study. So what's all that fancy words means? It means that the samples showed many genes which humans possess also. However, despite this, failed to match any known organisms in GenBank. So the sample's mitochondrial DNA, which actually tested human, like we have said, didn't even match human in the known species within the blast search, which would make sense if Bigfoot was truly part human with unknown hominid DNA. And we certainly know that Bigfoot isn't included in GenBank as it's not a recognized species. So it didn't match human in the GenBank. It didn't match anything. So here it is having mitochondrial...
Pure human.
Pure human.
Are you saying, when you say DNA samples, are you saying pure human mitochondrial and nuclear sample, or?
Yeah, what I'm saying is that to match an organism, it should match 100% of the genes to that organism.
Human.
Right. All these genes in the unknown sample should match all these genes in the known sample for this to be a recognized species. Well, we've talked about it having mitochondrial DNA, which is human DNA, but yet not matching anything in GenBank because it didn't match all the DNA.
So let me ask you this question. So with that being said, if our background, our mom is Hispanic, our dad isn't, where it's English and German and some other mixes through there, for example. So you take everyone on this planet that's human, and it's all going to still show human DNA. That's given.
Right.
That's what you're saying.
Right.
But this, even though there's various colors and different facial features, the way we look, depending on which region and which country and everything that we live, we all have the same DNA as human, is what you're saying. But this one didn't even...
Exactly.
It didn't even match.
It didn't even match any known organisms, including human. And so... Also, it was found, according to the study, that the mitochondrial DNA wasn't from apes or Neanderthals or to any of the less commonly known Denisovians, which is a type of archaic human. And based on recent genetic studies, these Denisovians' genetic material is found in modern humans. More is actually found in modern humans than Neanderthals, leading to the theory that Denisovians mated with modern humans about 100 generations after Neanderthals. So it's true, actually, that any non-African person has some Neanderthal in them, about 1 to 4% of their genes.
Say that again. So
basically, everyone has Neanderthal in them that's a non-African person. You have some degree of Neanderthal in you.
Now, when you say non, are you saying a person of a black in color, or it doesn't matter, just if they were in the African region?
Well, it says a non-African person has some Neanderthal genes in them,
but not as much as, say, someone that's not.
Right. So basically, if you're white or non-African
or lighter in color,
there's, according to genetic thought, that you have 1 to 4% of your genes are Neanderthal. I thought it was kind of interesting. I mean,
that is. I've never heard that.
And so so going back to the, it's thought by some scientists that actually the other type of archaic human, the Denisovians, their gene traits, for instance, in the people of Papua New Guinea, it contributes to their enhanced sense of smell and to the Tibetans' ability to adapt to high altitudes. According to science, hundreds of thousands of years ago, early humans in Africa split into 2 groups. And among them, Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and their sister species, the Denisovians. The Neanderthals headed west, the Denisovians headed east, And our ancestors left Africa much later and encountered both the Neanderthals and the Denisovians. I guess the Cro-Magnons replaced the Neanderthals, but that's a whole nother subject. But I thought just to kind of touch upon, we talk about genetics and migrations. It's kind of interesting.
Sure. Oh yeah. I think it does have a relationship to what we're talking about here to understand the whole, because DNA, many of you know this, but I'll just say that, and you know this, Bill, is that DNA changes our DNA can adapt to its environment. There's evidence right now, as an example, modern day DNA that's in our bodies right now, we can change the DNA within our brain tissue by our environment. And I read a study, I was trying to think of the journal, that this was a couple months ago, that because of our environment is so fast-paced right now,
right,
we're changing our DNA over time. It's adapting. Our DNA is designed to adapt to its environment, not only environment of the weather, the sun, and everything, but we can adapt to the circumstances, our stress environment, our work environment, our behavior patterns, and that can alter our further generations of our children's 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 children. So our brains are adapting to a very, very short burst of circuitry right now. In other words, we're not reading anymore. Right. We're not becoming deep thinkers anymore. We're moving away from that, which is a travesty.
Yeah.
Everything now is in sound bites, a tweet, a Snapchat.
Right.
And so
attention spans are less.
Attention spans are less. So you think, well, that won't do anything. But actually, it can change the DNA over time. You're altering your DNA. And that's what's mind-blowing to me, that within a generation or two, you can change the DNA structure based on your environment you put yourself in.
Right.
And it just blew my mind that you can, in just a short time, because usually what you're talking about here is land bridges and 20 and 30, 40,000 years ago, when actually I'm just talking a couple decades.
Right.
I mean, that's what's mind-blowing to me. I just wanted to throw that in there.
Oh, well, yeah. And, you mentioned earlier about the University of Texas Forensics Southwestern Institute or something rather. The University of Texas Southwestern, yes, that's what it. And again, that was one of the facilities that tested the whole genome or the entire gene set of one of the samples. They actually have what they call this. It's a highly technical analyzer called the High Sequence 2000 Next Generation Sequencer. So a lot of geneticists apparently in the know. I mean, this is high-tech stuff, and like I said, I mean, big dollars were dropped to study these samples. But basically, to go a little bit into that, so it would score, this sequencer, it would score unpure samples below 40 on average. Okay. So of the whole genomes tested, there was 3, I mentioned. Of the 106 samples, it was samples 26, 31, and 140. They all tested above 88. So remember, if it's unpure, it's below 40. So this is, again, another means to say, okay, no contamination.
Wow.
So it met the criteria, the threshold of 85 for purity of DNA. So it's pure DNA. The results were, like I said, performed at the University of Texas Southwestern. It was confirmed, these same results, by the way, confirmed by the University of North Texas Health Science Center. So it's confirmed by 2 facilities with university in the name, and again, not in Dr. Ketchum's lab. So the purity of DNA was legit, according to the study. 2 independent.
They put their stamp on it.
Yeah.
They put their stamp. This is a good sample.
Right. And so, kind of finishing up here, but, so how did the study know that the nuclear DNA was an unknown hominid? We established the mitochondrial DNA. Okay, that's human. Why did the study think that this nuclear DNA was an unknown hominid? So it's since all species pass on their DNA to their offspring, along with this includes mutations. We had touched upon that earlier, and that basically happens when a cell copies incorrectly its DNA before it divides. And these small mutations, called single nucleotide polymorphisms, I mentioned that earlier, they can help us differentiate between individuals in the same species, and that's why we use them in paternity testing, as mentioned previously. They also help us know about the similarities between groups of people and species similarities, as the particular set of SNPs, we'll say, I possess is similar to that of my dad, mom, and brothers and grandparents, but not or dissimilar to Beth at Bigfoot's Taco Bar in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, or Larry the likable llama at the Tulsa Zoo.
Stop it! You're making me hungry.
Yeah, but the point is that they'll use these mutation to say, okay, well, yeah, we can see that you're related to Lance, but hey, yeah, you're definitely not related to Joe at Gigi's Greasy Spoon.
Yet we're all human.
We're all human.
Yeah.
Right. So, like I said, it shows the degree of relatedness, and it's used actually in the popular mail-in family genetic studies. So they're looking at your SNPs, I guess. These.
So are you talking about like that commercial, like 23andMe,
right,
and all that? And there's another one out there, Ancestry.com.
Exactly. So they're using these mutations that are similar in families and dissimilar in others to differentiate you from,
these slight mutations.
These slight mutations, right. So in the study, 24 samples were tested against the whole genome. 2.5 million SNPs to be exact. So that's how many basically SNPs were tested of the samples, the total set of mutations. The human genome, or the entire set of human genes, has about 10 million. So remember that these SNPs are mutations found in between the genes that code for proteins. So if the samples were 100% human, the SNP's performance would be at least 95%. So, but none of the 24 samples tested met this threshold, with results ranging from 53 to 89. So if it was totally human, like I said, it didn't meet this threshold. It would be at least 95%, but they didn't meet the threshold. So what does all that mean? So the human controls tested, which were totally known to be human, that they introduced in the study, were 99%. And Dr. Ketchum even intentionally degraded human DNA again. So here she goes again. She's degrading DNA. Again, what we're trying to find out is, okay, how do we know this nuclear DNA is from Bigfoot? Why does the study think that? Yeah, you got it down to nuclear DNA, but why is that the case? So she intentionally degraded the human DNA again from lab personnel with bacteria, which still tested above 95%. So she degraded again the DNA with bacteria, and it didn't fall under the threshold, but above. So the mitochondrial DNA tested human, like I said, but the nuclear DNA was non-human, as this finding, quote, according to the study, suggests sequence variation from the human in the actual DNA obtained from the unknown hominid samples. So in the study's summary, it says our data indicates that the Sasquatch has human mitochondrial DNA that possesses nuclear DNA that is a structural mosaic consisting of human and novel non-human DNA. So basically, it's getting back to, again, what it's talking about, that there is a human component,
but a non-human component, and this non-human component, we don't have any data to know what that is. We don't understand it. We don't have anything in our blast, this data bank, to know or even remotely guess what it is.
Right. What they did is they used this information at this point using this high sequence analyzer, and they constructed what they call this phylogenetic tree based on the shared DNA between the primates, humans, and the samples. And so, according to the study, there was a statistically significant alignment across the primate order using the entire genetic sequence of over 2 million base pairs of samples, 26 and 140. So, of interest was the fact that each sample aligned closely with the human chromosome 11, indicating, according to the study, that the sample's genomes are closely related to humans and are likely derived from the same species. It was human chromosome 11 that, in the study, more closely aligned with the Bigfoot samples and best represents the primate lineages, including Homo sapiens, chimpanzees, rhesus monkey, white-cheeked gibbon, and the common marmoset, and other primate species. So, these again talked about the, and I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but I mean, we're going through a study. I mean, it's
sure.
But at this point, we've got nuclear DNA. We're looking at the paternal lineage. We're trying to figure out, okay, yeah, we know the mitochondrial DNA is human, but what's this other primate unknown part of the DNA we're looking at?
So does this mean that somewhere down the line, or excuse me, up the line rather, that you had a human, maybe not, or closely resembling us as humans, mate with a non-human component at some point in time? I mean, is that safe to say or reasonable to say?
Yeah, and of course they're theorizing, and no one knows for sure, obviously, but it's thought, I think, that it was a human female that was impregnated by an unknown hominid.
Okay, because that would make sense then, because you would have that mitochondrial DNA component of the human aspect.
Correct. Exactly. And so, some critics too, because again, like I said, I looked at, okay, well, what are the critics saying? Because sometimes, I mean, you can gain some things from that sometimes, to see if some things they're saying is, has some, holds water. And so some critics is like, well, why is chromosome 11? How come not chromosome, 8 and other chromosomes, etc.? And that's a good point, but they're not examining, I guess according to the study, chromosome 11 seemed to line up the most for whatever reason. So I looked, okay, well, let's look at chromosome 11. What's interesting about chromosome 11? I actually found some interesting stuff, and we're almost tying it up here, but it's actually it's an average size chromosome, but it's one of the most gene and disease rich chromosomes in the human genome. And
when you say disease rich, are you saying
a lot of mutations?
A lot of mutations there, that if you have a mutation there, that you could express a disease right from the get-go or later in life?
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And interestingly, of the 856 olfactory receptor genes in this chromosome 11, more than 40% are located in 28 single and multi-gene clusters along this chromosome. So it's a massive chromosome regarding olfactory or smell.
Oh, really?
Right. And I mean, it's that.
Well,
to
it
me,
makes sense.
Well, yeah. I mean, if Bigfoots can smell you from 10 miles away, then it makes sense, right?
Well, it gets back. Something just resonates in my head is what Lane said few weeks back, and he said this before, but I had forgotten it. And he said, there's an old saying when it comes to anything in the wild, eyes in front, they hunt. Eyes to the side, hide. So if you have eyes in the front of a species, then you're looking at something that has to have the ability to hunt. They have to have good optics, possibly our rods and cones, of course, have developed over time where we can't see at night.
Right.
We can, the best way to see at night is to increase, we know, being in healthcare, your oxidation levels, and antioxidants, what you need, and that's going to be in your blueberries. And which, by the way, this is something I started thinking of. We've seen these cryptids. In other episodes, we've heard other stories of these cryptids eating a lot of wild berries. Well, what's in wild berries? A lot of antioxidants. And so what's an antioxidant? Something that prevents something from oxidizing or breaking it down. Right. The most prevalent vitamin for that's vitamin C. Right. They're loaded with this, and a lot of proanthocyanins and different types of antioxidants that are in there to help fight cancers and disease. So in the war, people don't realize that a lot of the pilots, before we had all this digital night vision stuff way back, what was the ration that they used to give fighter pilots to fly at night? Blueberries. They'd make them have like a couple cups of blueberries at their mess tent every day.
That's interesting.
Yeah, did you know that? And this was before. Now gets over carrots. It was mandatory they have a couple cups of blueberries because it enhanced the night vision of the rods and cones to see discrepancies when they're flying at night. Isn't that interesting? And this was before the radon that they used in the dyes that they used to put on the dials. Uh-huh. That was radioactive, by the way, but they didn't want, but the company that started doing that didn't want to tell people. That gets into a whole other story. The people that actually were putting this on. But later that came about. But before all that, before night vision, before all this high-tech stuff we have, it was that. Which, isn't that interesting with the blueberries and everything, that are these wild berries and...
adaptation.
They're adapting. It's just enhancing the rods and cones. So there's a season where you find these things. If you
There's a berry connection for sure.
Oh.
And I think we should do later just a show just on that. I'm reading a book now that it talks about encounters and sightings just from berry patches that span over hundreds of years. So, I mean, that it is interesting for sure. And, going back to this chromosome 11, I found really some cool things, but actually there's a condition of chromosome 11 that's a mutation. It affects many parts of the body. It's actually classified as an overgrowth syndrome, which means that the affected infants are considerably larger than normal and tend to be taller than their peers during childhood. Interesting. Again, this is a mutation of chromosome 11. If that has anything for sure to do with Bigfoot, who knows? But interesting stuff, I thought. To conclude, if you've seen Bigfoot, like I said, this what we've talked about as far as the proof of Bigfoot, it really doesn't matter to you. If you haven't, though, I mean, it might. My thought after putting a critical eye to Dr. Ketchum's study is that it's hard to outright refute her work. It's super intriguing, certainly, and it's possible that Bigfoot's DNA just doesn't exactly follow what's known about genetics. As we know, science is dynamic, and like we've said earlier, I mean, discoveries are made daily. And so, I kind of fall in line with one of Dr. Ketchum's supporters. His name is Dr. David Swenson. He's actually a geneticist and biochemist, and he was actually interviewed. Joe Rogan interviewed him a few years back. But he said, as a scientist, this is quote, as a scientist, I want the damn thing to bite my fingers off before I'm going to believe it, end of quote. So, again, well, I think there might be some loud things pop in the air before my fingers get bit off. But anyway, so that's what I have. It's, it wasn't that easy to go through it and comb through it, and hopefully, it was interesting to folks who listen to it. I think there's more studies that need to be done. That's always said on any good study. More studies need to be done. I mean, we just can't think, okay, one study and that's the end. But I mean, then you ask yourself, well, what's the end goal? I mean, I don't think a study ultimately is going to prove its existence. It's really going to be people that actually see it, because seeing is believing, right? I mean, it really is. But the study does lend itself some, it does hold water. I mean, yeah, there's some questions that I would still have, like why is, chromosome 11 the only one? Maybe there's others chromosome that aligned. It's just that was the one that most closely aligned and such. So, but I think it's a solid study. And, like I said, I'm in agreement with this Dr. Swenson as far as the overall interpretation of it, because he said it's very interesting, it's intriguing, and he didn't outright dismiss it like a ton of people have.
Because he's a scientist. He's a scientist,
right,
and he deals with factual data.
Right.
And he understands and very, very familiar with the equipment used, obviously. This is what he does every day.
Exactly.
And so you can't refute something that you're of this testing equipment that you are very familiar with. You know how it operates. You understand the results. And you've tried to disprove yourself 10 ways to Sunday on it. And the results are the results. And, in many ways, when I think about this, as we're wrapping up here, I think, when it takes lots of deep pockets, and without private donation, it's not going to happen. And so, let's say you find someone like a Bill Gates,
right,
or you find someone like that's multi-billionaire. Do you really want the agencies that be, and I'm just, the governments and whoever else you're trying to note that that there is a creature that is not in our data bank. This is a new species find, because people, it is headline news. Right now we have the unfortunate thing of the hurricane travesties that's going on in Florida. But outside of that, I mean, we found a new species of this tiger that we thought was extinct. We found it in the jungles in Australia, right? And it's headline news. I don't know if many ways you really want that known. I hear on some of the channels that people say, we need to tell the government this thing's real. I know they know it is. It's not a matter of if, but do you really want them?
No. I don't think it needs advertising. I think it, and many folks might disagree with this, but I'm okay with a cover-up. I mean, because here's the thing: if it's widely known, and I say cover-up in a way to,
what you mean is you don't want them coming forth, right, and saying,
right,
we acknowledge that these things are out there, they're real, they're Bigfoots, they've been all over the country, they're in every state.
There's no need, because people would, I think, get posses and go hunt these things, and they don't need that. And these, the Bigfoots aren't out, pillaging and killing people everywhere. I mean, they just want to be left alone, right? So,
it makes me ask, because there's some that are aggressive.
Right. But for the most part, I mean, yeah, there's the aggressive encounters for sure.
Yeah, and you've had some killings over times with these things. And Dogman, that's a whole other story.
Right. But for the most part, they want to be left alone. They're not, so I guess if it's widely accepted and the government comes out with that, then you'd have these killing posses, and that would be a problem. I don't think anybody would want that. And so, like I said, a genetic study is not necessarily going to sway a person to believe or not to believe. It's interesting that science kind of lends itself to the fact that these things exist. As far as her study goes, it's one study, And I don't know if another study would be done because it costs so much money to analyze these samples and whatnot. So, but my point is that the elusive nature of these things that for the most part want to be left alone, I'm okay with that, for them to be quiet and us occasionally, have see one if you get the chance, and that's a special time, so to speak, unless obviously it's aggression, then that's a whole different ball of wax. It's a bad time. So, but yeah, again, my deal was just to kind of objectively review the study, and of course here it is, everyone decide for themselves. So